Have you ever actually wondered who really runs the world? When we think of global power, we almost always picture the people who dig the resources right out of the ground, right? The oil drillers, the miners, the folks sitting on massive fields of raw materials. But what if I told you that the true power lies somewhere entirely different? Today, we're going to look closely at the invisible monopolies of the global economy. We're going to see exactly how a handful of players quietly seized control over the planet's resources, and how the price of your breakfast bread or that smartphone in your pocket relies on bottlenecks you've probably never even heard of. Spoiler alert here, it is definitely not the people digging the dirt who pull the strings.
Okay, let's dive into this. Cast your mind back to March 23, 2021. The global economy was, well, it was basically paralyzed. $9.6 billion. Just think about that number for a second. That is the daily cost of world trade that simply vanished when a single container ship, the Ever Given, ran aground and got wedged in the Suez Canal. For 6 days, everything from your morning coffee and toilet paper to essential high-tech components for Tesla cars just came to an absolute halt. The world suddenly woke up and realized that a third of global trade hangs by a tiny thread, literally a narrow strip of water in the Egyptian desert. Now, if one stuck ship by accident can do all of that, what's happening with the people who actively, purposefully control the planet's key choke points?
All right, let's peel back the very first layer of this mystery, the historical precedent.
To figure out how this massive system was built, we actually have to look backward. Because the truth is, power shifted drastically away from the wellhead over a century ago. Back in 1877, the London Metal Exchange opened its doors and did something completely revolutionary. It turned physical, heavy ore into a lightweight financial contract. Suddenly, you could buy and sell metal before it was even mined. Then, jump to 1911, when John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil was famously broken up. The secret to Rockefeller wasn't that he just pumped oil. It was that he completely controlled the pipelines, the refineries, the transportation. He proved to the world that a monopoly over the logistics is incredibly resilient. Fast forward a bit to 1991, and we see companies like Glencore rising right out of the ashes of the Soviet collapse. They didn't start off by mining anything. They started purely as middlemen, proving once and for all that holding the entire logistics chain, from a mine in the Congo all the way to a buyer in Europe, is where the real crown sits.
So if there's one thing you take away from this, it's captured perfectly right here. Power belongs not to those who dig, but to those who control the flow. This idea fundamentally changes how we need to view global power today. Honestly, it doesn't matter how many rich deposits you're sitting on. It only matters whether you control the specific bottleneck through which that resource reaches the consumer.
So that brings us to layer 2, the processing bottlenecks.
We're moving right into the paradox of modern materials. There is an incredibly stark contrast between who mines and who processes. Take lithium, for instance. Almost half of it is mined down in Australia, and about a quarter comes from Chile. Most of the world's cobalt, that comes from the Congo. But remember our rule. Whoever controls the flow controls the entire market. And right now, that is China. Over 2/3 of cobalt processing and the vast majority of lithium chemical production happens inside Chinese factories. So Africa and Australia do the digging, but China holds the control. Because without that crucial processing stage, lithium is literally just expensive dirt. This bottleneck is so severe today that massive companies like Tesla are actually forced to sign proactive offtake agreements. That means they're effectively prepaying for lithium supplies that don't even exist yet, just to guarantee they have a spot in line. Crazy, right? And this brilliantly illustrates how a true bottleneck monopoly actually works in practice. Take rare earth metals. These are the lifeblood of our modern electronics. They are in your headphones, your computer monitors, huge wind turbines. Well, by the year 2010, China held a staggering 95% share of the global market for processing these specific metals. When they decided to restrict exports to Japan over a territorial dispute, the market completely panicked. The price of neodymium skyrocketed from $40 to $330 per kilogram in just 3 months. Europium, it quintupled in price. It became glaringly obvious whoever holds the rare earths absolutely holds the future.
Let's zoom out a bit for layer 3, the arteries of global trade.
Now we're looking at the actual, physical, geographic arteries that are essentially holding these processed materials hostage. Our entire modern way of life is reliant on just a handful of massive choke points. We already mentioned the Suez Canal, which handles about 12% of all global trade. It earns Egypt roughly $9 billion a year, essentially just for holding a strip of water. Then you have the Strait of Hormuz, squeezed between Iran and Oman. It carries a whopping 20% of the world's oil. It is so narrow and so intensely critical that when Iran threatened closures and some tankers were seized back in 2019, insurance premiums shot up an extra $100,000 per trip for a single tanker.
Over in Asia, the Strait of Malacca sees an unbelievable 90,000 ships pass through every single year. And let's not forget the Panama Canal, which is the absolutely vital link for bringing South American copper to the rest of the world.
But hey, it isn't just static geography we have to worry about. Nature itself is creating new, highly vulnerable choke points. Look at 2022. A record drought hit the Mississippi River. That meant transport barges could only be loaded at half capacity, dropping U.S. corn exports by 20%. That exact same year, the Rhine River over in Germany dropped to a depth of just 32 centimeters, causing freight rates for vital chemicals to jump 5 times over. And then in 2023, the Panama Canal, which relies entirely on fresh rainwater from Gatun Lake, suffered a severe drought. Vital copper from Chile and huge grain shipments completely stalled out, directly driving up global prices. Weather alone can literally turn an open artery into a blocked valve overnight.
Now things get a little more invisible. Welcome to Layer 4, the paper resource market.
Here is a genuinely shocking fact. Global prices for the things we use every day are often set by people who have never, ever seen the physical goods they are trading. 30 times. Think about that. That is how much the volume of paper barrels of oil traded on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange exceeds the world's actual physical oil production every single day. The same goes for copper futures, which exceed actual annual production several times over. The real, everyday price of the resources powering your life is determined by these complex financial layers that are entirely disconnected from the physical mine itself. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these so-called paper markets can literally be physically manipulated. In the 2010s, Goldman Sachs bought up a bunch of aluminum storage facilities in Detroit, and here was their scheme. They bought physical metal and stored it. When clients naturally requested their metal, they only released the exchange-mandated bare minimum, which was 1,500 tons a day. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, they were actively shuffling the aluminum back and forth between their own warehouses. This sneaky move created a massive, completely artificial queue, and because of this fabricated delay, the market premium for aluminum jumped from $50 to $500 per ton. Automakers were massively overpaying for metal that was basically just sitting right around the corner.
And you know, the financial manipulation goes even deeper than moving metal around warehouses. Take the 2012 LIBOR scandal. It revealed that major banks were quietly tweaking benchmark interest rates, specifically the London Interbank Offered Rate. We're talking about a system where a single phone call or an email asking a buddy to nudge the number down allowed a few traders in London to manipulate trillions of dollars in contracts. They effectively changed the underlying cost of basic resources and home mortgages for millions of people worldwide just to hide their own financial problems or boost their trading profits.
Which brings us to our final layer, Layer 5, the invisible gatekeepers. This is where we look at the ultimate unseen controls of our world. Water is the ultimate human resource, right? Well, in December of 2020, water officially became a financial asset. The Nasdaq Volus California Water Index began trading the right to an acre-foot of water, and it's currently priced around $1,200. But on the actual ground, the physical access to that vital water is dictated by a few operators at places like the Hoover Dam. Their daily decisions determine the water flow for 20 million Californians. So, water is successfully turned from a free, natural resource into a tightly controlled, monetized asset governed by just a handful of engineers and traders.
Then you have the dry, kind of boring technicalities that secretly act as massive, massive hurdles. Rail gauges are a perfect example. Russia uses a 1520 millimeter gauge for its train tracks. Europe uses a 1435 millimeter gauge. That tiny little difference in width halts massive coal trains dead at the borders, costing thousands in delays and transfer fees. And what about patents? The Haber-Bosch process for making ammonia fertilizer is well over 100 years old, yet licenses are still tightly held by a few corporate giants. Want to make fertilizer to grow food? You have to pay them. Today, we also deal with ESG certificates. If your aluminum is produced using hydroelectric power, it gets a special green certificate and suddenly sells at a 20% premium. And very soon, the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM, will act as a brand new carbon tax. These certificates and standards essentially dictate who gets to even play the global game.
Let's pull this all together and see how this builds into what I like to call the modern mining obstacle course. Step 1 is just digging the ore out of the ground. Honestly, that's the easy part. Step 2, well, you have to buy the processing technology, and often you're doing that on very strict Chinese terms because they hold the secrets for things like rare earth processing. Step 3, you must pass extremely strict multi-million-dollar industry certifications. And finally, Step 4, you have to pass global environmental and social ESG filters just to bring it to market. Missing even one of these steps means you have zero product to sell.
What used to be simple mining has become a deeply complex, multi-layered trap.
All right, let's wrap this up. Conclusion: the true cost of access.
So what does this all mean for us at the end of the day? The absolute truth is that true power in the 21st century isn't the resource itself. It is the access. It's the access to the physical ports, to the patented technologies, to those crucial certifications, and to the massive financial markets. The price of the bread you eat for breakfast or the smartphone buzzing in your pocket right now relies entirely on these invisible bottlenecks. If a drought hits Panama, or if a trader in London casually changes a number on a screen, or if a brand new environmental standard is set in Europe, you are the one who pays the price. As long as a few major players control these choke points, every single one of us remains vulnerable.
Which leaves us with a pretty critical thought to ponder. Looking back at everything we've just uncovered, from single ships getting stuck in canals to manipulated paper markets and 100-year-old technical patents, what do you believe is the absolute most vulnerable point in the global economy today? Take a moment to really think about the invisible layers we've explored in this explainer. Thanks so much for joining me, and remember to keep questioning the systems that are working invisibly all around you.